This colorful plantscape thrives on a busy street in a suburb near Chicago. The story of the garden and the gardener on A Gardener's Diary.
Craig Bergman's career as a garden designer began almost by accident. He was working at a flower shop in Chicago when a customer asked him who would arrange the displays in the front of the shop. When Craig said that he had created them, she immediately asked him to work on her garden. From that first garden, Craig started a design business with his late partner, James Grigsby. They also started a nursery near the Wisconsin border that includes a garden center and a number of demonstration gardens. Craig's home, which originally housed the landscape business, is on a busy street in Wilmette, Illinois. It's hard to believe that this 15-year-old garden is next door to an auto body shop. The entrance to the garden shows right away that this is a very special place. Craig, we're here in the suburbs of Chicago, right out
Wilmette.
Wilmette. Now, where does that name come from?
It's from the Willamette Indians, actually, and it's spelled really strangely, and that's why we decided to spell it W-I-L-M-E-T-T-E.
Okay. And all these conifers, do you just leave these out all winter long, and being that it is Zone 5 or 5B?
Well, actually we can't. Right just after Christmas, typically, we get sub-zero weather. And so therefore, I haul the things up to our nursery and we keep them in min-heat.
And what about beauties like that? It looks like an echeveria, but I'm not sure.
Well, it does, but it's an Aeonium kiwi. And it looks like a specimen plant, but actually what it is a colony of a whole bunch of plants. We inverted 2 hanging baskets onto themselves to make a sphere, and then we put cuttings into each hole in the basket.
Wow.
But it's great because it has this hot pink margin.
It's like a big flower in the middle of all these conifers.
Yeah.
And this arbor is a little bit almost too short for you, but it seems perfect for the space.
But you know what, I'm happy to bow for plants every now and again. Here's a Clematis Haldine for you.
And look at the way the light just hits the undersides of these.
Well, typically when I plant clematis, it's for frontal view, but because we walk underneath this, you can actually see the detail of the flower by looking up underneath it. So.
How do you have to treat it here in the Midwest?
Well, with Haldine, what we do is we cut it about halfway back in the spring, and that keeps stimulating suckers to come up, so you don't just have the old wood that sometimes a bad winter will kill back. So we always want that vigor from the base of the plant as well. But it seems to do very well competing with everything else around here.
It's very happy. And your whole garden is enclosed here, and it has such an intimate feeling, but you're not afraid to use big plants in a small space. You've got this wonderful magnolia that provides a canopy here. This is a Soulangeana.
It's a Soulangeana, yeah, the old saucer magnolia. We think this is probably one of the oldest ones in the North Shore because it is protected between the buildings. And this greenhouse actually came from a local high school.
Really?
Our friend who owned the house before we bought it, her husband, she bought it for $1, and it was a pile of parts. So, and it's been assembled, and this used to be where I did all my propagation before I bought the nursery property. So now I just collect orchids in it.
And then you've got the garage wall, which is another wall to not only to provide a microclimate, but to display plants. And this just intrigues me with the variegated foliage, and it feels almost succulent-like.
Well, this is Hebe buxifolia variegata. Not hardy here. We use it as a pot plant. I like to use them in spring and fall containers because they do best in the cool weather. The variegation gets a little weak as the summer heat comes on, but it's a great plant. Perfectly hardy in warmer climes that people would use it as an ornamental shrub, but here we just keep them.
Hebe buxifolia variegata. I like that name.
I love it when you speak Latin.
When you enter the gate into your garden proper, it's really not, it's a deceptive sort of view because it's so full of plants. It looks a lot larger to me, but it's really not that wide of a space.
I think the whole intention here was to capitalize on the intimate nature of the space and intimize the view of the plants.
I love the way you've used plants to create walls and hedges, and this is a wonderful hedge that borders the street here.
Well, this is Washington hawthorn. The city actually wouldn't allow us to put up a 6-foot wood fence 15 years ago. So they said you can plant anything you want. So we planted these hawthorns that I got, Washington hawthorns I got on sale. And I'm so glad they didn't allow us to put the fence up because it's much better now.
Oh, yeah.
For me, it's a juxtaposition of these formal clipped elements, particularly if they're oversized for the space, and all this kind of helter-skelter.
Soft and flowing.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's much more.
Soft and flowing. Well, you've got
Yeah.
this wonderful little rose. Is that, it looks like ballerina? Or...
Actually, this is the polyantha rose, the fairy.
Oh, it is the fairy.
But the rose that I like so much is this one. I found this. This is the white fairy.
Oh, that's
It was supposedly
gorgeous.
out of cultivation. They had lost it, and I found it in a nursery block about 3 years ago, and now we're growing our own white fairies again. So,
And you've got just the wonderful combination of the whites and the pinks and the blue here. And the lily, it's an Asiatic, but you don't see that many, or at least I don't see that many pink Asiatic lilies.
this is truly pink. It's Montreux. It's an old cultivar. It's probably been around for 40 years, but like anything, certain cultivars come out of fashion or you can't find them anymore, but this one we always have.
And it looks great with a larkspur.
Yep, I like to interplant plants that hide the legs of other things. You know, by the time a larkspur's in bloom, it's ugly at the bottom. So by planting it amongst the lilies kind of conceal it. This is a great little fuchsia. I call this a Barbie fuchsia because the flowers are so tiny. The cultivar name is Isis, and it withstands our heat very well. It tumbles, and I like it because it's so tiny and it provides interest.
It's
and it looks great
charming.
with the moss, I think.
It does. It's charming, and especially in this container. It looks as if the container's ancient, even if it isn't.
But I love the stone because as it becomes more and more porous with age, it gets mossy and cruddier, and I
Isis.
just like the texture.
I'll have to look for that.
An oak leaf hydrangea pushes the Zone 5 envelope with spectacular results. And a buried downspout inspires Craig to create a miniature water feature. Stay with us.
Craig Bergman's garden in Wilmette, Illinois is filled with a tremendous variety of flowers, trees, and shrubs. Craig started growing plants as a young boy on a plot of land his father gave him, and he's been gardening ever since. Now, a successful garden designer, he's made it his mission to bring a new approach to gardening in the Midwest.
There's still this kind of old-time attitude that the Midwest, you garden for sustenance, it's for survival. It's not true. I mean, with the internet and with this passion for gardening that's been happening over the last almost 2 decades now, there is no excuse for Midwesterners not to have fabulous gardens. It is possible. The Midwest is incredibly rich, and there's a reason why this area has become the breadbasket of the country. It can be the garden basket of the country if people just get enthused and get out there. I'm so excited that the hydrangea quercifolia snowflake is in bloom today. The racemes are so big this year, it's kind of unbelievable.
It is just one panicle of flowers is really enough, but you've got a whole group of them.
Well, I planted this as a 1-gallon plant 3 years ago, and last year it was maybe 12 by 12, but this year it's proving that it's really established itself here. This is just hydrangea quercifolia, the straight species. Hydrangea quercifolia is marginally hardy for us. We're real protected here. So if we were to live maybe 20 miles further west, we'd have a harder time growing it because it does bloom off of old wood, and often the more showy hydrangeas, we don't get many blooms here.
So you can push the limits, and particularly in a microclimate, with again, this huge wall that is just, how tall is that wall?
I think it's 22 feet.
That...
You'd never know there's an auto body shop behind there.
No, you wouldn't. So Midwest gardeners should be encouraged that they too could probably grow oak leaf hydrangeas.
Absolutely. Be in zone denial.
Be in zone denial.
Right.
That's new for me. And the climbing hydrangea, it's such a great name, Monomala petiolaris, is one of my favorites because not only of the flowers, but the foliage and the yellow that it turns in the autumn. And I love the way you've trained it against the greenhouse wall here.
Well, often if we don't have a lot of space, we'll actually grow a vine as an espalier because we can't get a tree established. Something else that's great about climbing hydrangea, it has beautiful exfoliating bark in the wintertime when it's mature enough.
You've got this sort of layered, the hemlock, the barberry, and the rose, which I don't know.
That's a musk rose called Mozart, which is a little bit darker pink than Ballerina and a little bit lighter pink than Marjorie Fair. So,
and do the musk roses do particularly well in the Midwest?
They're not necessarily particularly suited to the Midwest, but they're suited for the light condition that's here. They can stand a little less sunlight. They have a little more lax, rambly habit, and because they bloom in these big trusses of flowers, it seems like we always have something going on. And this is a challenging area just because I have a buried downspout, and when we get a lot of rain, this becomes a wet, sloppy area. So that was my inspiration for the old foundry pot to kind of look like a basin for this dwarf papyrus. But then everything that's on the back side of the foundry pot likes its feet wet with the astilbe or the Louisiana iris or the persicaria. So even in this little tiny space, every once in a while we have a cultural condition besides light that we have to deal with. And I try to have those areas seem seamless. So when you look at it, it doesn't look like, oh, there's a wet spot. You know?
No, it does look seamless. And the dwarf papyrus is such a striking accent against that delicate, the tops are so delicate the way I guess those are seeds. I don't.
Well, I think they must be little seed heads at the tips of the leaves, but it almost looks like fireworks to me.
Miniature succulents add a southwestern touch to this Midwestern garden. And all kinds of things can be blended together with a technique called crazy paving when we continue.
Craig Bergman started this garden 15 years ago with his late partner, James Grigsby. Flowering plants thrive in the summer heat, but the real challenge for a gardener here is coping with the famous Chicago winters.
Gardening in the Midwest is really gardening with the extremes of weather. We can have up to 20 below zero temperatures in mid-December. This year we had a frost the third week of May, which was very uncommon for us, but it still can happen. And with all the things we hear about the ozone layer and the like, you know, this may just be part of our norm, that the temperature fluctuations and the moisture fluctuations become reality.
This path is great. It's obviously put together with recycled objects.
Yeah, well, it's called crazy paving. There's actually a term for it.
That's a real technique,
yeah,
crazy paving.
Vita Sackville West made it real famous at Sissinghurst. There are fond memories in this path, you know, of either from my parents' house, like this old furnace grate, or these are modern carved stones from Indiana, but the woman does really great work. And old Wilmette Street bricks.
And this area right here, this whole grouping is really so beautiful with the clematis.
That clematis is Jackmanii superba, which is a selection that's more purple and a little more glowing than the standard Jackmanii, and well worth searching out for.
Beautiful.
It's hard to find. And that's another one of my stone garden ornaments with yet another succulent in it. I just thought that Aeonium topsy-turvy would look really great in that old stone urn because the roses on the face of the pot look very much like the succulent. And because I can't get back there to water it, I wanted something that was hot and dry, loving back there, so I wouldn't have to worry about it.
Well, it works great, and that's such a. So, what do you do with the Aeonium in the winter? You have to take it out.
Yeah, and usually come wintertime, it's filled with winter berries or something pretty as well. But if you look, there's probably 150 babies all the way around the edge there. This is a great musk rose. This is Marjorie Fair. I've not known her for more than 4 or 5 years, and what I like is because my garden has a little less light, I can still have intense color like a rose like this. And she blooms all the time, and she can clamber up a structure, or you can keep her just as a shrub like this. We're just in between cycles. The trusses of flowers, there were giant trusses 2 weeks ago, and about every 3 weeks she'll recycle back.
And then you jump across the path to now I would call this deep burgundy.
Absolutely, yeah. But deep purple would be a great name.
Deep purple.
But this is another Aeonium called Zwartkopf. What's funny about this plant is as it grows, it gets taller, and then it starts looking like this mutated palm tree. So we keep taking the tips from the tall plants at the end of the season and start with short plants. But
With such a short growing season, your growing season starts?
it starts about mid-April and goes to hopefully second week of November, but usually we get our first hard frost around Halloween.
And this, I want to take this home with me, but fortunately it's too heavy to move.
Well, this is actually an old stone sink carved out of one piece of rock, so it has a great big drainage hole in the bottom, and it's about 6 inches deep. And I just use it as a picture frame to do an annual succulent tapestry in it each year.
And these are Echeverias?
So the biggest globe-shaped ones are Echeveria glauca, and here's that topsy-turvy again. And then my friend Ruth gave me a whole bunch of rusty gears last year, and I thought, well, that's perfect. I mean, that's that symmetric thing
They
again.
mimic that whole thing.
Absolutely. And they're planted in pure sand and then mulched with bluestone chips, and I never water it.
Wow.
So it gets enough water from residual sprinkler watering of other plants or the rain.
Getting color at a shady spot is easy with Coleus, especially with some fascinating new varieties. Stay with us.
This garden in Wilmette, Illinois is a challenge even for its owner, garden designer Craig Bergman. Working within the confines of a fairly narrow lot, Craig has made the most of the limited space available.
I think some of the most successful gardens that I've seen have been designed to really create an interesting space about it. It's transporting. When somebody comes through a gate, you should be somewhere else, or if you round the corner, you should be surprised. This garden could not be designed in another space and be as successful with the same collection of plants. It's basically crammed between 4 buildings with tall walls. That space, that raw space, is what makes this garden so special.
With such a small gardening space, actually, how big is your garden? It seems a lot larger to me with all these wonderful containers and plants
the
and
lot
everything.
is 125 by 55, I think. So it's a long, skinny spot, and most of our space filled up with buildings. So we're just kind of cramming in to the spaces we have left over. And your comment about all our containers, sometimes it's really all we have space for, because we have to have a walk to get from one building or the other. And you happen to be here when the Coleus is looking really great.
So, summertime, great
Yeah,
time
absolutely.
for Coleus.
It loves the heat and the humidity. It withstands, it's actually, people don't realize that it's pretty drought tolerant. I mean, it's a plant that can withstand a lot more abuse than what, say, an impatient can with the same cultural condition. This great big one in the center is Mr. Wonderful. It's one of my favorites. The more sun it has, the more bright the veining is in the leaves.
So
And,
this is,
It's all the same plant, but for whatever reason, this probably gets a little bit more dappled light than this, and if you go down inside, you start losing the variegation.
now which one is
Well,
this?
this one's Hurricane Jenny. I like her because she has this real severe sawtooth to her, and the more sun you put it in, the more salmon it gets. And for whatever reason, a lot of Coleus don't have that salmony color in them, and this is one particular that has quite a bit. And as the plant gets bigger, the leaves can sometimes twist. So I think that's where the hurricane part comes from.
Okay.
You're looking really good in this tropical shirt amongst these tropical leaves.
Perfect. I dressed for the garden.
Yeah.
Now, what about this one? This is
Well, that
trailing
one's called
black.
Trailing Black.
That's what I thought.
And there's trailing green and trailing rose, and it's kind of interesting here. This gets a little more light with the tiny little leaves. And here's the same plant with a little less light.
Right.
And look how much bigger it got, just because it's reaching, trying to make more food for itself. And this is one of our babies. This is a dark leaf sport from a plant called kiwi fern, which typically is kind of a rusty color. And this was just a little shoot that had the dark purple leaves. I think it's one of the most refined ferns out there, or refined Coleuses out there. One of the greatest rewards that I get from this garden is truly looking out the kitchen window after I fed the dogs and seeing what's in bloom that day. For me, the biggest pleasure this garden and any garden would give me would be the interaction with nature and me. I love the sun hitting the Amsonia. I love the chipmunk running down the walk as long as he doesn't have a lily bulb in his mouth. And it makes me slow down and think about something other than just work or a problem.